What's up everybody, this is Master Ian Gamer. Overwatch 2 has been live for 2 weeks now, so today I wanted to do a sort of progress report type video where I focused a little bit on my thoughts on the game at this point, now that we've all had the opportunity to actually spend a decent amount of time playing it. I think it's safe to say that for most of us, that initial rush of new game excitement has largely worn off, which means we're now starting to get the real feel of how Overwatch 2 as a game actually ends up feeling. And while I personally am still having a blast playing the game, there are a number of further issues and concerns I have, which have only become more and more apparent the more and more time I actually spend playing it. So without wasting any more time, I'll jump right on in, and the first major concern I have going forward with Overwatch 2 is actually the number of maps we have. Now, Overwatch 2 introduced 6 brand new maps, 3 of these being for the brand new push game mode, and the other 3 being divvied up between the hybrid and escort game modes. And while all 6 of these new maps are phenomenal and I absolutely love getting to play on them, I don't think there were quite enough new map additions, especially considering how many maps we actually ended up losing. As everybody knows, with the launch of Overwatch 2, the original Assault or 2CP game mode was removed entirely, along with all the maps that were part of it. You can still find these in custom game modes to play around with, but in terms of the quick play and competitive experience, all these Assault maps are now gone at this point. Which means, when Overwatch 2 launched, we actually lost 3 maps. Now, technically there are a total of 5 Assault maps, but given that Paris and Horizon had already been culled from the quick play and competitive cycle well before Overwatch 2 killed Overwatch, I'm gonna go ahead and give the game the benefit of the doubt and say that with the loss of 2CP, we only actually lost 3 maps, since that was the actual map reduction going from Overwatch 1 to 2. But, unfortunately, it doesn't stop at simply losing Assault maps. For this first season, at the very least in particular, we also lost 4 additional maps, being Rialto, Havana, Blizzard World, and Numbani. Now, upon Overwatch 2's release, there wasn't any sort of official statement saying that these maps were being removed. I think there was some sort of statement talking about Numbani having a lighting bug, which is why it wasn't even in custom games at launch. But eventually, Blizzard did acknowledge that yes, these 4 maps are missing, and that it's because of a seasonal map rotation cycle. Now, they did also mention that there are some sort of balance tweaks being made to these maps, and I'm assuming that's the real reason they aren't currently playable in quick play or competitive. If I'm being totally honest, I think Blizzard just at the last minute sort of came up with the idea of saying, oh, we're gonna have seasonal map rotations, as a way to sort of dampen the blow to admit that their game blatantly wasn't finished on launch, and a lot of the OG maps people love playing on aren't even there if you're in quick play or competitive. But that's just my theory on the matter. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that some of these missing maps also just so happen to have brand new PvE areas tied to them. But regardless of why this ended up happening, the overall outcome is that, simply put, Overwatch 2 has fewer maps in rotation on launch than Overwatch 1 did on the day it died. And that, I think, is awful. Now, if you're a newer player coming into Overwatch 2 for the very first time, you've never touched Overwatch before in your life, I'm sure you won't even really notice this being an issue. But as someone who's spent years and years playing the original Overwatch and am now going into Overwatch 2, I am starting to get pretty sick of seeing the same old maps over and over again. And it's not even a matter of me having an issue with the old maps individually. I think all of them are well and fun in their own right, but with the removal of so many old maps, it just feels like I end up seeing the same still existing maps over and over again. I would love being able to mix it up by going to Blizzard World or Rialto, but no, I have to wait until next season, which honestly just doesn't feel great. Again, who knows what the exact reason for Blizzard implementing these map rotation cycles are for each individual season, but all I'm saying is that I really hope Blizzard reconsiders doing this come season 2, because honestly, at least when it comes to the quick play experience, there is no good reason to just exclude maps from the cycle. All you're doing is providing less content for players to play and enjoy, and it drastically harms the replayability of the game overall because of that. Also, literally, as I was editing this video, it was announced that Junkertown has now been removed from all queues due to some sort of graphical bug, and won't be coming back until October 25th. Yay. Now, speaking of missing old content, let's talk about another thing that happened to vanish fairly early after the launch of Overwatch 2, and at least at the time of me recording this video, has yet to make his return. And that is, of course, Bastion. Now, Bastion was removed from Overwatch 2 completely and utterly following the discovery of a bug which basically let him shoot off his ultimate indefinitely and cause pretty severe damage with it. And while I certainly understand Blizzard removing him from the game in order to fix this bug since it was a pretty big issue, the fact that it was only just announced in the same forum post I mentioned earlier regarding Junkertown that he'll finally be returning on October 25th, thus meaning that by the time of his return on October 25th, Bastion will have been missing from Overwatch 2 for more than 2 weeks, which is more than 2/3 of the entire time Overwatch 2 has even existed, is honestly just awful. And even if you're someone who doesn't care about Bastion, you never play him and you hate playing against him, so you're glad he's not there, the fact that one of the pre-existing heroes for Overwatch has just been removed for a very prolonged period of time reflects pretty poorly on Blizzard and their ability to handle technical issues. Now, I'm not going to pretend to have any extensive knowledge when it comes to correcting a bug like the one Bastion had with his ultimate, but the fact that it's taken this long for them to fix it and re-implement him into the game is very concerning. I understand Blizzard has a ton of issues they need to resolve at the moment, especially technical ones and bugs in the game and whatnot, but I would imagine that bringing Bastion back to the playable hero roster is probably one of their top priorities. And if that's the case, then why has it taken this long? This, in conjunction with a number of other issues and bugs that have been in game since the game launched, like challenges not tracking properly, thus preventing players from getting all their weekly Overwatch coins, people still having server connection issues where they get randomly kicked from matches or are unable to even log in the first place, horrific queue times, which are a rather curious one. If there's so many people playing at the moment, why are queue times so long? I don't know, that one's a bit suspicious if you ask me. On top of a number of other UI and graphical issues that are still plaguing the game itself, it really is just disappointing to see how slowly Blizzard is making progress towards actually fixing these things. If they can't even manage to bring back Bastion in a reasonable amount of time, then why should I necessarily believe they're going to fix any of these other major bugs that are going on? I don't know. I think more than anything, it's just sort of disappointing to see this outcome. I think it reflects very poorly on Blizzard's ability to actually handle issues like this at this point in time, but who knows? Maybe they've done something really fancy with Bastion while he was gone that we won't find out about until October 25th. Or for all we know, maybe Bastion himself was so disappointed by the launch of Overwatch 2 that he wandered back off to Black Forest to sleep for another 30 years, and Blizzard themselves had to venture after him to drag him beeping and whirring back to the game. Regardless though, it is disappointing to see that it's taken them this long to even give us a progress report on where he is and when we can expect him to be back. But moving on to another big thing that has been sticking out to me after playing Overwatch 2 for 2 weeks is the progression. Now, since day one, people have had their complaints about progression, namely because progression is now entirely tied to progressing through the battle pass without any sort of individual player levels or progression or cards or anything outside of just progressing through that battle pass to get those cosmetics. And while I didn't like it from the get-go just based on the premise of how Blizzard was structuring it, I've really started to notice just how detrimental it is to the player experience for all the progression to be tied exclusively to the battle pass. And I think one of the biggest aspects actually that stuck out to me about it is the amount of Battle Pass progression XP you actually get from completing a match relative to how much you get from completing daily, weekly, and seasonal challenges. As it stands, the bulk of experience you get on any given day will almost certainly end up coming from completing these challenges. The amount of XP you get from completing even just a single daily challenge is ludicrous compared to how much you earn from simply playing a match where you don't complete any challenges. And while it certainly feels good to get that massive boost for the first 2 or 3 matches you play in a day, the side effect of getting that little dopamine hit is that once you run out of challenges for any given day, it almost starts to feel like it's not even worth it to keep playing at all. As I'm sure many of you have already picked up on, this is something that's very reminiscent of how many mobile games handle progression, where they sort of incentivize the idea of playing daily as opposed to just binging for 10 hours a day as a way of building up a habit in their players of coming back to the game on a daily basis, which, when you get into the psychology aspect of it, often ends up leading to greater long-term player engagement with getting them to come back consistently. And while this has time and time again proven to be effective in retaining players in mobile games, I think it actually has a detrimental aspect to Overwatch itself, given the type of game Overwatch actually is. Most mobile games don't have the best gameplay. They're usually more of just grind fests that hook you on the idea of progressing and earning new cosmetics or characters or something within the game itself, but the gameplay of these mobile games that have this sort of daily boost structure typically isn't that great. Overwatch, on the other hand, has phenomenal gameplay. It's the one legitimately good aspect of the game at this point. So, to have a progression system which actively discourages you from playing more than like 5 matches a day, all that really does is make me not want to play the game that I otherwise do want to play. Sure, I still get the satisfaction of playing a game that's fun to play, but then each match is ended with a teeny measly amount of experience that is a huge letdown from the amount of experience I got for the first few matches I played today. It's almost as if the game is elevating you to get all hyped for your first few matches and then just nosedives into the ground and says, well, you've already had enough fun for today, come back tomorrow. It legitimately feels like the game is actively discouraging me from playing it. Now, Overwatch 1 admittedly did have something similar to this. It had the first win of the day XP boost, which was a pretty hefty amount of experience you would get on top of the typical match experience, but the ratio of how much bonus XP you got from that single daily boost was not as extreme as the difference between the challenges being completed and playing a match in Overwatch 2. In Overwatch 2, the difference in experience amounts you get is so great that it almost feels like you're wasting your time to even try playing the game after your dailies are finished. And again, I know Blizzard is trying to emulate that mobile game structure of getting people hooked on a daily routine, but where this system I think does benefit most mobile games by getting people to push through that agonizing, unfun mobile game gameplay just so they can complete challenges and get that dopamine hit, I think it has the straight up opposite effect on Overwatch 2, where ultimately it just ends up dragging down an otherwise totally fine, totally fun gameplay experience. And simply put, that makes the game worse. But moving on now to my final and biggest concern, I'm worried that Overwatch 2 doesn't have enough staying power. What I mean by that is, what in Overwatch 2, if anything, will make the game more relevant and fun to play for a longer period of time than the original Overwatch ever was? Since the launch of Overwatch 2, I've had the pleasure of being able to talk to a number of different people who used to play Overwatch back in 2016 or 2017 and quite enjoyed it back then, but then ultimately gave up on the game and haven't touched it again until now. The relaunch of the game with Overwatch 2 has of course stirred up a big commotion in the gaming community, and it's gotten everybody playing it, and the one reoccurring sentiment I hear over and over and over again from people who are coming back to Overwatch 2 for the first time since playing it years ago is that it just feels like the same game. That isn't necessarily a bad thing, since the original Overwatch was a phenomenal game, but it makes me wonder what, if anything, about Overwatch 2 will keep those players playing Overwatch 2 longer than they played Overwatch 1. And as far as I can tell, there isn't anything. They may be having fun playing the game at the moment because it's the trendy thing and everybody else is playing it, but what happens when the next big game comes along? What happens when a new title releases that draws all those people's attention to it, and Overwatch 2 then just boils down to probably whatever existing player base it had when Overwatch 1 died? I suppose the free-to-play aspect of Overwatch 2 at the very least gives it the potential to bring in a ton of new lasting players who are going to focus exclusively on Overwatch and nothing else going forward, but I suppose it's something that only time will really end up telling. I've already started to see a number of these aforementioned players who've been getting into Overwatch 2 already kinda start to lose interest. They enjoyed seeing the new heroes and the reworks and the new maps and everything, but given just how little new content there really is in Overwatch 2 relative to Overwatch 1, now that 2 weeks have passed, I think people are already starting to feel a bit over Overwatch. Those people who love the gameplay of Overwatch enough to be longtime fans in Overwatch 1 up to the day the servers shut down are probably going to keep having fun in Overwatch 2 because of how similar it is. but in terms of reinvigorating the franchise and bringing in more players than ever before, I'm really skeptical that that's going to end up working out. And when you consider that in conjunction with all the terrible changes they've implemented to the monetization structure of Overwatch with the release of Overwatch 2, as well as the clunkiness of the UI and mechanics and bugs and all that, I'm worried that in the long run and grand scheme of things, Overwatch 2 might end up pushing away more long-term players than it ends up generating. Again, the free-to-play audience is going to be a big variable in this regard that could very easily just bump the numbers up indefinitely for Overwatch 2, and I am very curious to see 2 more weeks from now, a month from now, a year from now, what the state of this game actually ends up being, but at the moment, I am concerned for the future of Overwatch 2. I think Blizzard has done a lot of really great things with the gameplay in this sequel, but overall, I don't think it was enough to really get people interested, at least not in terms of being long-term players. Now, admittedly, we'll still have to wait and see how things change once the PvE ends up releasing next year. I think that's probably going to bring in a ton of new players who'll be sticking around for quite a long time, if the PvE ends up being good, but until then, we'll just have to wait and see what ends up happening. And on that note, thank you all so much for watching. Definitely let me know your thoughts on Overwatch 2 now that we're 2+ weeks into it. Are you having fun with it still, or have you already sort of moved on? Either way, I'd love to hear from you, and as always, be sure to subscribe, follow me on Twitter, hit up that bell icon, and come join my Discord server to hang out and never miss any of my future Overwatch content. Special thanks to my YouTube channel members who help make these videos possible, and if you'd like to join them to earn some cool rewards, then just hit that join button down below. Otherwise, this is Master Ian Gamer signing off, and until next time, have a great day.